Hello guys, welcome to another video. This particular video is the beginning of this series. So this series is all about Rayman motion, right? So this particular playlist just going to serve as all things Rayman motion, every API available in Rayman motion, different concepts, and from basic to advanced concepts in Rayman motions, right? So we'll be looking at different concepts, different APIs, different hooks available in Framer motion, and just to derive and just to understand the power of Framer motion. Like I said, this is going to be very beginner friendly, right? So if this is your first time working with Framer motion, or the first time you're trying to work with Framer motion, this should get you started as soon as possible. So what method are we going to use for this particular playlist? It's just going to be each video in this particular playlist explaining concepts and explaining concepts, and I will try as much as possible not to make it very very long videos. It's just going to be very short videos, and try to explain every concept in every video as straight as possible, and give you examples and give you examples of the possibility of Rayman motion. Now, the first question, what is Rayman motion? So if you're a React developer, right, in 2024, and you try animating your components, or should I say the elements in your web applications, you could agree with me, it's very complex, right? To animate stuff, to take stuff from one particular position to the next. React as a library itself doesn't provide any solution out of the box for that, right? That's why we need something like Framer motion. It gives us the superpower to animate our components. Now, mind you, we could animate our component with CSS, CSS3, CSS animations and transitions. But if you've tried that, you could confirm with me again that it's very complex, right? It's gonna take you a lot of time to be able to write a lot of keyframes and a lot of things to happen across your screens and components. So that's the whole idea of Framer motion, to make it easier for you to animate, make it easier for you to be able to move items, do some animations across your application, right? So as seen in the documentation here, it says it's a production ready motion library for React, right? So you could use it in production. It's been around for like a while, and it has up to like 2 million weekly downloads. So like it's production ready for your React applications. So you're out of the box, just having Premium Motion on your application. You have access to animations, you have access to variants, you have access to gestures, you have access to drags, you have access to taps, you have access to scroll, you also have access to animating your SVGs, just out of the box, right? So you can see here now, we just have a box here where we just try to change the position X, the position Y, try to scale it, try to rotate, just with this line of code. It works like magic, right? So that's the whole idea of this playlist. We're going to try to break down every concept involved in Framer motion and try to make it easier for us to understand what's happening behind the scene and make us a professional or a pro using Framer Motion. Yeah, I think we are good to start. So next, we'll be setting up our projects and installing Framer Motion in our React app. Let's get started.
Hello guys, welcome to another video on our Framer Motion playlist. In this particular video, we'll be checking out the setup and the installation process of making use of Framer Motion in your React application. For the purpose of this video and also this playlist, we will be using Framer Motion with a Nextjs application. You could try using out React, create React app, or React Fight or some other plugin with React. But for the purpose of this video, we'll just go with Nextjs. Okay, so let's go to the Nextjs doc, and we're currently on the Nextjs doc. Go to the installation process, how to create a new React application. Let's copy this command and open up our VS Code. Okay, so we have VS Code open up here. Let's quickly run our command. Let's create next app at latest. Yes, we need to install this. Project name is just gonna be just say Framer Motion playlist. Would you like to use TypeScript? Yes. ESLint, yes. Tailwind CSS. Let's just add Tailwind CSS. We don't want to use the source folder, the directory, and we're also going to use app router to say yes for this, and this should do it. So we'll be back once this is done. Okay, our installation is done. This time around, let's open it up in VS Code. So let's move into Framer Motion playlist, and let's quickly open this up in VS Code. And so what we currently have here is just a regular React Next.js application, and this should be perfect for us to start learning about Framer Motion. Quickly close this up. And okay, so the next thing we need to do just is, remember, Next.js is just a React application, like I said earlier. So any React library you're using, you could always use Framer Motion with it, and it should work. So this is Framer Motion on the npm directory. Let's quickly just go to, it says an open source motion library for React made by Framer. It's an open source project. We can see it does all these spring keyframes, layout animation, shared layout animation, gestures. There's a lot of things involved with Framer Motion, and in this playlist you will get to experience and see how we could add animations with Framer Motions. So now let's quickly install Framer Motion in our React application. Full of VS Code, and I love using Yarn. Let's install Framer Motion in this application. That shouldn't take much time, and Framer Motion has 3 million downloads every week. That's really crazy numbers because of how popular it is and how very easy it is to use in creation of your applications or creation of adding animations across your React application. That's amazing. Installation should be done very soon. Okay, so our Framer Motion package has been installed. Let's quickly run the server for our Nextjs application. So we just want to confirm if Framer Motion has been added to our application. Let's quickly hit localhost 3000. Okay, so our server is up. Let's quickly take out all these parts we don't need in our application, and you can just see that real quick. Okay, so let's just remember we have the CSS installed. Let's just style a div with a height of 6, the background color of something reddish. So the reason why I'm doing this is just so we could see if Framer Motion is really installed in this application, because if you remember, we installed it through npm. Okay, so we have just one box at the center of our page, and let's quickly try adding Framer Motion or the motion components to this particular div. You don't need to understand what's happening right now. You don't need to be too worried about this, because we're going to get to all of this, and I'm just doing this for testing purposes, right? So in the next video you get to explain what this means and what's the whole property. Like, that's the whole idea of this whole playlist, right? To explain and to break down each of the concepts in using Motion as an animation library in React. So what we're just saying here is, on the initial of this particular div, it should be set to false, and it's going to animate on the x-axis by 100. Let's quickly go back to our page and let's see it. Let's refresh the page. And okay, so it's not a function. Remember, Next.js makes use of React Server components, right? So by default, all your components inside your app directory are all server components. Let's just make this client so this can run on our browser instead of on the server, and this error should go away now. Let's refresh this and see. Okay, let's take out initial force. Okay, instead of making initial force, let's try something. Let's just make initial to start on the x-axis of 0, then move to 100. So Framer Motion has been installed, and we have confirmed Framer Motion is installed, and we could add Framer Motion in this project, and that should be the end of this video. In the next video, we'll be looking at the motion component, what does it mean, and how can you use it in your React applications for trying to add animations and also add transitions and a lot of cool features that has to do with animations on your React application. Yeah, thank you. Hello guys, welcome to another video in our Framer Motion playlist. In this particular video, we're going to be talking about motion components. So first off, what is motion component? Motion components is just the building block of using Framer Motion in your React applications for animations. So think about it like this. You want to add Framer Motion into your particular components. You want to add animations with Framer Motion. You need to make use of the motion component that is provided from Framer Motion. And that being said, what motion component means is just you being able to introduce elements, let's say HTML elements and HTML tags that are animatable, in the sense of you could animate them. And I also wanted to point out, Framer Motion is optimized. It's optimized for performance, it's optimized for speed, and it gives you best animation and a very smooth animation. And when I talk about smooth and a more detailed animation, I'm talking about 60 frames per second. Framer Motion runs on 60 frames per second, which is a very high speed frame rate. So using Framer Motion in your React application, you just have to that your animations are going to be very smooth and very detailed, and there'll be a lot of reduction in motion blur or having blurry animations and all. So you're gonna have a very smooth animations with Framer Motion. Without wasting much time, let's go into code and see what motion components is, because I feel we will understand it more by showing. First of all, we're going to pull up our code base we set up in the previous video where we installed Framer Motion. So we just have, this is just a component that is importing motion from Framer Motion. And the idea around motion components is when you import motion components from Framer Motion, you have access to adding animations to whatever elements you're going to use your motion components with. So let's put an example. Let's say we have a p tag that it's just say some dummy text, and let's format this properly. Let's see what it looks like. So we have just a text. Okay, let's style this. And also remember, we still have Tailwind CSS installed here on this particular starter code. Okay, so let's make the text extra big so we can see the text. This text is extra large. You have the desire to animate this particular paragraph. If you look at this paragraph is just a regular HTML paragraph, right? And you don't have the ability to animate. In Framer Motion, with this paragraph here, if you want to animate this particular paragraph, what can be done here is this. We import motion from Framer Motion. Then we come over here and see our motion we just imported dot paragraph. We bring this up. Doesn't really make a difference, does it? Because we haven't initialized any animation or any keyframe or whatever we want this particular paragraph to do. For testing purposes, let's just try something. Let's say on initial, we'll get to this. On initial, we're going to set the opacity to 0. That means the opacity will be 0. We won't see it. Then we're going to animate the opacity of the particular text to 1. And let's add some transition. So what we just do here, we just add a delay of like 0.6. Okay, and let's go back to our browser. Now let's see this startup application. You don't see this. You can see the fade in animation. It fades in. That is the whole idea of the motion components. This particular component we have here, if you see carefully, we have motion dot, which is paragraph, and this is a motion component. In the sense, you could say, oh, this is an element. This is a regular element. But at this point, you adding this motion dot p, which is paragraph, gives you access to a lot of options of what you could use to animate this particular paragraph. And that doesn't end there. We have a whole lot of elements, and based on the documentation, it's been recorded that they have all the elements are existing in HTML. So what does that mean? It means all the elements that are created, that have ever been created or that exist with HTML actually exist in your motion component. So we have access to an H1, we have access to H2, we have access to H5, We have access to even A, which is just your link. We have access to address. Like, you have access to all the HTML tags you could ever think about, you've ever used. You have access to image, you have access to legends, nav, options, parameter, and what you should remember is the motion component doesn't just end in HTML elements. You could also create motion components with SVGs. Let's see this. Motion.svg. We have access to SVGs. So this is the general idea of using motion components. If you're going to use Framer Motion in your React applications for handling animations, you always need to make use of motion components, because that is how you have the power and you have the ability of your element to be exposed. So one last example. So if we say we change this to a regular paragraph tag, we have an error here. It says it's not assignable to type, initial does not exist. So at this point, TypeScript is telling us that initial does not exist in your regular paragraph tag. So we adding the motion.p gives us access to the initial and a lot of variables. Access to transitions, the animates, the initials. From Framer Motion, we could import motion like we already said and we already learned. And there are other variables we could also import, or should I say there are other objects, hooks, and values that could also be imported from Framer Motion. For example, we have the animate present, we have use motion value, we have use transform. These are the most of the popular values you're going to use in your animations. So mostly what you'll be using is just the motion component. And I think we have come to the end of this particular video, and in the next video we will be looking at the initial value, the animate value, and also the transition values that comes in your motion components. Thank you. Alright, welcome to another video on our Framer Motion playlist. In this particular video, we're just going to be looking at initial property, the motion component. So what exactly is the initial property? So the initial property, we could just say it's just a property provided in your motion component that lets you decide which values your motion component should start from. So you could think about it like a default style, right? Where you could say, okay, this animation should start from this particular place and animate to the next value. Perfect example could be something like saying this particular component is just going to start from opacity of 0 and animate to an opacity of 1. And the general idea is it's just going to give you like a smooth fading animation, because why? The element is just going to be hidden on the page, then it's just going to animate into the opacity of 1. Okay, so let's see an example in code. Okay, so we just have an empty page here, and remember we always need our motion component, and our motion component imported from motion. Let's quickly import it. Import motion from Framer Motion. Okay, then we need to make use of motion.div just for an example. Let's create on that motion here. Then this is just going to serve as our paragraph, and here we're just going to have some dummy text. Let's format this properly. Okay, so what we just have here, just a simple div, a paragraph that holds some dummy text, right? Let's quickly preview this in our browser. We just have a dummy text, very simple, and that is it. The initial value is an available property on our motion components. We could say our initial should be an opacity of 0, and if we check our page right now, our browser, we can't see nothing. Because why? Because opacity of 0 basically means it's not going to be on the page, it's going to be hidden, and you can't see it on the page. So think about the initial property like the default style your particular element is supposed to have on the start of that particular component. You know, we already have Tailwind CSS already set up in this particular project. We could also say opacity of 0, which works as the same thing. You come over here, you won't see anything, because why? It works as the same property as your initial. So we are saying opacity of 0, don't show this. But in the Framer Motion way, it's best advised to you make use of the initial when trying to set your default value. So let's say opacity of 0. Cool. And we could take out this one. Then we could just say this should animate to an opacity of 1. Let's say this. Let's refresh the page. We have the smooth fade in animation. What this basically means is in the start of this element, we're not going to see it on the page. It's just going to be 0, right? And we're just going to animate to an opacity of 1. So let's show another example. So let's take out our p tag, take out our initial and our animate properties, and quickly use CSS and style this. Let's get a box of 100 pixel. and a height of, let's say, 200 pixel, and a background color of something black. Yeah, and let's quickly serve this as, let's say, H screen, which is 100 view height, and also want to take it to the center of the page. Let's just justify this to center, and items the center, right? And let's see what we currently have. Just have a box. Let's something like 200. Okay, cool. Okay, so we just have a box in the center of our page which has the background color of black, right? So what we want to try to do here is we want to animate the background color of this particular box from black to, let's say, red. Yeah, okay, so let's quickly do that. So we could say initial. Remember, right, initial is just the starting of this particular box, for example. Now let's take out the background black. Remember, right? So now we say the background color of this just gonna be black. Now go over. It's the same thing, right? You have black as the background color. This particular value is set as the default value of this particular container or this particular box. So this is black, and okay, let's take out this ones too. Let's say, let's just animate everything. Let's make use of initial for the whole value instead of using Tailwind CSS classes. The width of, we're going for 200, right? And height of 100. Okay for us. Okay, let's make it 200. Okay, cool. So this is what we have here. We just have a box, same thing as what our set style kind of applied on this component and the box itself. So for us to make this animation work, right, let's animate. We're gonna say animate this value, change the background color to red, format this. Okay, cool. And let's say width is just gonna be 300 and a height of 300, just to give you an example. So we are going to see how this looks like right now. Okay, cool. Let's refresh this page. Now on the start, you can see what happened here. On the start, we have a box of 200 width and 200 height. Then on animate, we get the box of red and also 300 height, 300 width. So the key takeaway from this particular video is just how you could use your initial value, set the default style for your particular container or your particular wrapper around your animation. You see how we made use of just Tailwind CSS classes, and also we could also make use of CSS classes to do this. But instead, we just made use of the initial property to handle the initial state of this animation. Now to make this kind of look more good, let's just add some transition, which we're gonna get to in the nearest video. Let's just say an ease of, let's call this ease of ease in and ease out, right? And duration, just say duration is just gonna be 0 points. And yeah, this is how it looks like now, right? So from the initial value to our animate value, and that is how you make use of your initial value in the more components in Framer Motion. Okay, so in the next video, we'll be looking at the animate value, the transition value in your Framer motion components, what it basically means and what it does. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Welcome back to our Framer Motion playlist. In this particular video, we're just going to be looking at the animate property. So in previous video, we've gotten to see what the initial property means, how we can use it to start our animation. So for this, we'll just be looking at the animate property. And the animate property is just a key feature that allows you to define the target state of your motion components. Think about it like this. You have the initial where your animation starts from, and you have a target state where you want the particular animation to animate to. So say for example, you have a box that starts at the beginning of the page, and on animate, it should go to the center of the page or to the other end of the page. So the animate property provided in your motion components in Framer Motion just gives you the ability to apply your target state. So it gives you the flexibility to change various properties of your motion component. You have the ability to change properties like the position of that particular element, the size, the opacity, the color, the box shadow, and a whole lot of different properties you could change depending on your requirements and depending on the kind of animation you're trying to achieve. Without wasting much time, let's jump into code and see what the animate property Framer Motion does. So right now we have VS Code open, and we just want to see an example for the animate property. Remember to start with Framer Motion in the motion component, and how we could do that. Remember, we just need to import it from motion. So we just have a div and a div which we could just style. We just have to start with Tailwind CSS, our utility class. let's say this should have a height of 200 pixels and a width of 300 pixel. Background color is just going to be black, or let's try something else. Our background color is just going to be something thick red, and we could say we have a rounded side of let's zoom in properly. Okay, cool. So let's quickly have a preview in our browser and see what we have now. So we just have a box in the center of our page. Now, if you remember from our previous video, we could actually do all the styling from the initial property, but right now we just choose to do it using our class. And we have access to the animate property, which is basically just gives you the ability to target the particular elements and the target state you want this particular element to animate to. Now, if you see, we just have a box that is static in the center of our page that doesn't do anything or that doesn't move. So what we could do here, we could say we could animate this. Remember, we could animate different kind of properties. We could animate the dimension, we could animate the position, the color, the border, the rotation, opacity. We could also animate the 3D perspective of this particular element. Text layers, which is just like colors, padding, background color. Like, there are a lot of properties we could actually animate. So for this example, we are just going to animate the dimension. So let's scale this to 1. And remember, with our initial, let's scale this to 1. Okay, so at this point, we could just say the initial of this particular element should just start from a scale of 0.5 and scale to 1. Okay, let's say this again. Cool. Now, just to explain what we try to achieve here. So this particular element starts from the scale of 0.5, which is the dimension of this particular element, and we are animating to scale of 1. Now, back to our definition of the animate property. Yes, it just gives you the ability to target a particular element and target the state of that particular element in the animation life cycle. In the sense like, okay, this particular element animates to this, because that's what we're doing here. So it starts from the scale of 0.5 on the dimension, and it animates 1. We could try something else. We could say, let me break this so we could see the styles. Since you already have a border radius of 6 pixels, we could just animate the border radius. Border radius is just gonna be let's say 100 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Okay, cool. So you see, it starts from the 6 pixel to this, and let's make it 100%. Okay, cool. We could also change the background color. Let's say purple. So for example purposes, let's take out this animate. Let's cut it out and see again. So now we just have a box that is on the scale of 0.5. It doesn't animate, nothing happens to it. So now in Framer Motion, for us to be able to apply animation to this particular element or this particular item, we make use of what? The animate property. And like we said, the animate property, we could animate different values. We could animate different CSS values of this particular property. And what we just did here, say, okay, on the scale of 1, border radius of 100%, and color of purple. So let's page again and see our example. It starts from here and animates 100%. And so we could try another. We could try adding more example here. And let's try rotating this particular element. Let's rotate it a full rotation, and rotate our initial to just be 0, and have a rotation of that particular element when the animation starts. Yeah, you can see it. So it animates from 0 on the rotation of 0 while also increasing our scale and border radius and background color to purple. Let's see it one more time. Okay, something I just wanted to point out real quick is when you're working with color motion, you cannot animate using the color name, right? If I pull up the documentation, we could see it says if you try to animate colors, is for example what we're doing here, working with the background color, we should use the hex value, the RGB value, or the HSLA value, right? Instead of using the names value like CSS names value directly. Cool. So I think with that, I hope we've been able to understand what the animate property does, what it means to make use of the animate. The animate is just like what you need to animate that particular property. Like I did before, if you take it out again, you won't get any animation, right? Nothing is going to happen to this element or this item on our page. Bring it back the animate. This is where we set the rules of how this particular element or item is just going to animate. So in the next video, we'll be looking at the transition property, how we could use it, and try to explore some examples. See you in the next. Hello guys, welcome to another video in our Framer Motion playlist. In this particular video, we're just going to be checking out the transition property. So the transition property in Framer Motion is what gives you control over how your Framer motion components should animate from one state to another, right? So it allows you to define values like the duration, that's how long the particular animation should take, the delays, and also some other options like the easing functions of that particular animation, thereby creating smooth and polished transitions that basically enhance your user experience. Without wasting much time, let's jump into code. Okay, we got VS Code open up here. So for us to really understand how transition property works, currently we just have 4 boxes here, which are just started with our Theory CSS utility classes. And each of the boxes just have the width of 300 pixels and height of 200 pixels, different background colors. So let's quickly have a preview of that in our browser and see how that looks. Let's refresh the page. Okay, cool. So we just have 3 boxes. And what we want to try to do now, we want to animate these boxes from this starting part to the particular ending of this particular row. So we're going to do it for each of the boxes, right? So first off, remember to do that, we need to convert this particular divs into motion component, which you already did here by importing motion, right? So what we could do here, we could say we could set the initial of x to 0 and set x to 80 view width, right? So now let's see how that looks. Yeah. So quickly, let's refresh the page again and see this takes it to this part of the page. Okay, cool. So now we already have the initial and the animate, and like you already know, in this video we'll be talking about a transition property. So now let's see it. In your motion component, you have access to the transition property, which you also define by creating an object, and in your property you have access to different values you could use to set how your animation should look like or how your animation should run. So for example, we could set the delay of this particular animation to 0.6 seconds. So basically this means before this animation starts, take 0.6 seconds before you start. So let's quickly preview that again in our browser and see how that particular value works. Now refresh the page, take some seconds before particular animation starts. So there's a delay happening before it starts. In the previous example we saw, if we take out this delay, okay, I think a better idea is just to take out this animation. Let's just copy our initial and animate to the second example. Format properly. Okay, so let's see how this works. So we have 0.6, which is the first one. It has a delay of 0.6 before it starts. So you see this particular one doesn't have any delay. It's using the default delay, which comes with just a normal spring animation, which is 0.3 seconds by default on this particular motion component. So one of the value we could actually set in our transition property is the delay. Another value which you mostly make use of again is duration. So duration basically is how long this animation should take, right? How long should this animation take to run? So let's say this should be, let's make the 0.9 seconds. Quickly do that and let's see how this works. Okay, can we notice the difference? So we have added a duration of 0.9, so it takes extra seconds, approximately 1 point something seconds, right, before this animation completes. Now if you remember, this second motion component doesn't have any transition property. It's just making use of the default. Let's see this example again. It takes 0.9 seconds for this animation to complete, and it takes 0.6 seconds for the animation to delay. So let's take out our transition property into this particular component too. So for this, we'll say this should take a delay of 0.8 and a duration of 0.92. Now let's quickly see that. Let's refresh the page. Cool. So there's a slight delay. The first box starts moving before the second box, right? Because of how we have defined in our transition, or how we have defined our transition property for it to occur. So basically we're saying this box should wait some seconds before moving compared to the first box. So like this is just an example of what we could do. Okay, so for our third box, let's add difference property. So we're going to say a delay of 0.9 and let's see how that works. Let's refresh. Okay, cool. So the reason why this doesn't work, remember, is because we did not set the initial and the animate properties. So let's quickly set the initial and the animate property. So we're just going to start from the initial of x of 0, animate 80 width, that particular row. Cool. Let's refresh this again. And so we have 3 boxes moving simultaneously, right? They all are supposed to run for 0.9 0.9 seconds, which is the particular duration we set. So to have a better understanding, the first box here has the delay of 0.6. Next one starts at 0.6, 0.8. Next one starts at 0.9. And they are all supposed to run for 0.9 seconds. So let's see this one more time. Okay, on that property available in our transition property is the ease, right? So basically the ease is just how this particular component or this particular element should move from start and stop, right? So we could also set the ease, and interestingly we have some values already set up for us in Framer Motion. So as you can see here, we have the anticipate, we have the back in, we have the back out, we have the ease in, ease out, cycle cycle in. Like these are different kind of ease options you could actually set for your item. So now let's see different examples. So for example, let's see anticipate, and then for our next box, we're gonna say this should have, okay, let's go to the second one. This should be the first one. This should have an ease of a linear ease, okay, which is just like on a straight line directly. Then for the last one, you'll say it should have a ease of ease in and ease out, or we could just say an ease of ease in, right? Now let's see how that looks in our animation. Okay, cool. So we have our 3 boxes, and we have, now you see these are all different boxes and they all have different animation. Okay, if you notice in the first animation, which is just a linear animation, it basically starts on a straight line, right? Okay, so if you notice for the anticipate, where we added the ease of anticipate, the particular box kind of anticipates animation in the sense of like it kind of expects the animation to happen, or it kind of draw back a little bit before the animation starts. Okay, let me show you again in our browser. Now if you notice, just notice, okay, I think to notice this properly we need to take out some, we'll just comment out some values. Let's comment this out, let's comment the last one out, okay, and we just have one box. Now if you could watch this box closely, it kind of anticipates before it starts the animation, right? So that's what the anticipates value for the ease, right, does. Let's see some other values. Remember we tried in linear, let's try in ease out, or let's try in ease in, so we could see this value directly in VS Code. Okay, starts as a very smooth animation and ends as a very smooth animation too. Okay, so we have different values over here. Okay, so before we go to the next transition property, let me quickly bring back our examples. I think we could just change this one to something like linear, previous example. Okay, cool. So what we want to do next, we want to check out another value which is available in our transition property, which is repeats, right? So for example, you want to repeat your animation for a particular time. You want this particular box to move from the starting here to the end for a particular time. Let's say for example you want it to happen for 3 times before the end of the animation, or you want it to happen for 4 times before the end of the animation. Okay, so for the first box, which is this, we have the value called repeat, right? And the repeat is, it just takes in the number, right? So for the first value, we're going to say we need this animation to repeat for 3 times. Then for the second value, we're going to say this particular animation should repeat for infinity, right? So infinity is also a number, which basically means forever. This animation is going to run forever. So lastly, we'll say we also want this one to repeat for 10 times, right? So let's quickly go back to our page and see what we currently have. Okay, cool. So we have this. Okay, cool. And okay, so this first one is supposed to run for 3 times. This one is supposed to run for 10 times, and the third one is supposed to run forever. Now you notice how it runs. It gets here, goes back to the starting of this part, goes back, and this goes on forever and ever. Because why? We set the repeat to be infinity, right? Now we also have another value in our transition property, which is called the repeat type, where we just have some value, right? So first we have the loop, we have the mirror, and we have the reverse value. So for the first one, this should run on a loop. So the repeat type of loop, basically what it means is just the animation is going to run again, right? That is the default type. That's what we're currently seeing here, right? In our animation, this is just the default type. It's just going to keep on running. Then the second value which we have here, the mirror value, basically what it means is the animation is going to run forward and backward, then forward again, and it's just going to take our box from the beginning to the end. Now let's quickly see that example. That should be the first one. Okay, let's refresh and see this. Okay, so beginning and okay, cool. So that is the mirror value, right? And if you say for the first one, we also want to add a repeat type of reverse. So what reverse does is basically it does the same thing, but it does the same thing as the mirror, right? But it reverses the animation, right? And I think a better way is just to show what the reverse does. Now this is it. The reverse should be on the first one. The second one should be our mirror, and I think this one is still the default, which is just a loop. Okay, cool. Now if you notice, this is the default one, which is just a loop. It gets to the end of the animation and it jumps back to the beginning. Like that might not be a kind of requirement for the kind of animation you're trying to achieve, but if you need an animation that is actually realistic, I think the best one to go for will be the reverse or the mirror value. So the mirror value and the reverse value are kind of almost similar, but it basically starts the animation and ends it slowly. That is the difference between the reverse and the mirror value. I think with this understanding, to say getting to understand how the transition property works and how we could actually use it in defining how our animation should run. There's a lot of properties to check out, which might be above the scope of this particular video. And so without wasting much time, we'd call it the end of this particular video and see you in the next one.